In the name of Amen, the Supreme, the All Powerful, the one and only true Lord, in Amen we think, in Amen we trust, and in Amen we will continue forward forever as the 144,000 within the Republican Mentellect. Good evening, this is your host, Indira Mendez on Mentellect Radio, and today's date is January 25th, 2018 on a Thursday evening, and tonight's topic is going to be about the psychology behind the doll test experiment. This is a short 30-minute talk show, so we might not be able to take calls in on this particular topic. We might be able to discuss this on a later date, come back to the topic again. But just briefly, I just wanted to go over, what the doll test experiment was about. It was just basically a test that was with two dolls. It was a black and white doll, and it was for black and white children and other ethnicity of children that were involved that took the test. So what happened is they were being interviewed, and they was asked certain particular questions on how the black and white dolls were viewed, and the statistics behind the black and white dolls. So I just basically wanted to talk about the psychological part of the experiment, and the psychology behind the doll test experiment was basically meant to observe the minds of each black and white boy and girl, mentality, and their level of mentality based on the questions that were asked during the interview process. So as a result of looking at YouTube videos, because we do have YouTube videos that's out there that shows the experiment from when it was first put out in, I think, like in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, all the way up into, I guess, like modern times, where it was repeated back again to see the level of the child's mentality. So just looking at the YouTube video, I just seen a lot from black children in particular that their self-esteem was very damaged. And the question that comes to mind are, what are some of the negative impacts that the doll tests have on both black and white children? So when it comes down to the black children in particular, I realized that based on that they had a lack of identity, and they had a negative impression behind black, and it didn't really show, equality between black and white, and how they seen themselves. And it was more or less like a mental disease, and not just a mental disease. I mean a disease in how they view being black, and just using the doll as an experiment. And then I also seen a willfulness of inferior complex within the black children that were being interviewed with this test. So these are some of the negative impacts that I picked up from just reviewing the YouTube video. And like I said, the most that stood out to me was that their esteem was very damaged, and they really couldn't, they didn't really have that much of a confidence in who they were, and couldn't identify with they couldn't identify with the fact of being black, or identify with anything that was superior, and what they thought, and from their perspective of things, is that they felt like the white doll was more superior than the black doll in particular. Okay, so that all stemmed from just a mental bondage that goes way back from slavery. So this is just a culprit of how the children still allow that effect to linger on them. So now when it comes down to the white children in particular, the boys and girls that were experimented, I got a lot of a very antagonistic view from them, whereas they just had this view of black being bad or whatever the case might be. When one of the questions that the interviewee would ask was, who do they think is dumb? It was one particular girl that stood out to me, and she said dumb, and she pointed to the brown, the doll, and she, because it was actually another test that was different shades of children from light to dark, and she pointed to the brown one in particular. So that was very antagonistic. That's what I meant to say, and it just showed how they have like a negative view on just black and white in general. And then it was a lot of racial degradation degradation behind black. Like they didn't have any positive thing or outlook on black in particular. Okay, and that's also I seen a very mental dis-ease in their view because of their false development of false pride, because they looked at themselves as superior and looked at black as beneath them. Is what I got from them. So I looked at it as a sense of false pride. Okay, and then and in the end of it all, I also got an assumed superior complex with their view on how they comment on black and white in particular. Okay, so moving along to the mental bondage part, the question is what type of mental bondage the dog test experiment have on black children in particular. Now, like I said, when it comes down to the inferior complex, whether people are, excuse children in particular, whether they show it or they speak it, sometimes it can still show that sense of fear, the lack of esteem, or that weakness, in their whole demeanor. So even in the interview, you could just read their body language, and it said a lot, based on the complexity that they had. Okay, and then moving along to under them being under a false impression about themselves and being an outcast because of the color of their skin. This is a mental bondage that they had, and then being marginalized because of the stereotypes behind being black and white and just color in general, and then lack of acceptance of self and kind. So a lot of this happened because you know like I said, partially because of slavery and because of the homes being broken in black family homes, and because of the just whole disunity amongst the so-called black race. Okay, so with that being said, I'm just gonna play a little bit of music and then we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. That was Blue Six, Pure, Sunset Child, Chill Mix. So now moving along back to the topic in itself. Once again, the topic is about the psychology behind the doll test experiment. So now about the doll test experiment, the question is, what was the whole purpose of the doll test experiment? That was one of the questions that, to my mind, and basically it was to understand the, like I said from the beginning, it was basically to understand the mind view of the mental part of the black and white child view on the black and white doll in particular, and the questions that were, linked to the interview to get their, understand their view and observe their view on it. And it was to statistically number the morality and logical view of both black and white children as well, and to understand the development of their esteem, and last but not least, the psychological health and development of the child, mental health as well. So that's what I looked at it as. The whole purpose of it all was to do that, even though it didn't really help in terms of changing, the black child's, view or esteem or the white child view, there was no form of equality in the two. It just was a lopsided kind of experiment because at the end of the day, when you take a test or you do a test on something, yes, you have to, get results. But at the end of the day, with the results that you do get from it all, you have to come back with something to, I guess, to aid in whatever shortcomings is from the test. So in other words, what I'm basically saying is that if you see some type of faultiness in a test and you see something is not right, you have to combat it or come back with something better to even it all out. So even though it was just to just do that in particular, um, at the end of the day, it didn't change the children's view or how they see themselves or how they will grow up to be. Okay, all it did was just identify, like I said, the whole aspect of how they see themselves, their views, and like I said, it goes back to the statistics and the morality and the logical view of a black and white child, mentality. Okay, so that was one aspect of the whole purpose of the doll test experiment. And moving along to the next bronze children. And who are the next bronze children coming out of the black race? Because the next bronze children is not going to have no inferior complex or mentality as the black, so-called children that were in that test. They're not going to have that type of mentality. They're going to have more of a confidence about themselves. They're going to have a sense of identity of who and what they are. And they're going to be very confident. Okay, and this is not just about race, or pulling a race card, as I always say. This is about restoring their confidence in particular. And black, having the mentality black, we destroying that whole word black. And we are going to take on the word bronze, and that's how they're going to identify themselves with. Okay, the next bronze children will not be programmed to self-hate themselves. Okay, and the next bronze children will have more than just an identity, but power. Okay, and the next born children will be able to be leaders and legendaries of the future, not children, those particular children that were in that test and experiment where they had an inferior complex and really didn't even have a future. It was more or less that their future was being destroyed. Okay, so that's not what we're going to be doing within the Republic of Mentellect. We're going to be raising our bronze children up to be strong and not weak, physically or mentally. Okay, so the whole purpose of this broadcast, as I said, this is just, the introduction of the whole psychological, the psychology behind the doll test experiment. Hopefully, intellectual renewable carves will touch more on in regards to this and elaborate more to where all his listeners will be able to gather more intel on this whole topic on tonight. Okay, so with that being said, I want to thank you all for those who took the time out to listen on tonight. As I said, this was just a short and sweet broadcast, 30-minute broadcast, and those are just the things that I wanted to talk about and cover. And just very briefly, for those who may came on, later, I talked about the damaged esteem of the black child and the negative views on from the doll test experiment from the black and white child, how they viewed it, and then I talked about the mental bondage and what type of mental bondage the doll test experiment had on black children in particular, and then the experiment in itself, the whole purpose behind it. And then I talked about the next bronze children coming out of the black, so-called black race. So this is what I explained on tonight, very briefly, what this whole topic was about. So with that being said, you all have a good night, and thank you once again for listening.
It's the Republic of Mentellect, rising out the black race to the white race, out the black race to the white race. It's the Republic of Mentellect, black race to the white race. If it's hell, I'm then it's hell us. They tried everything just to spell us. fed us religion, gave us fake gods. Through all of that, we beat the odds. Now we coming together under one flag. Colors red, gold, and blue. Superman, Superwoman, that's me and you.